So yeah, I mean, Santo Daime is how I was introduced, how you introduced me to ayahuasca. Uh, and man, I've only had one ceremony with, I guess what they would call jungle ayahuasca, the original recipe. My first four were all with the Santo Daime. And man, it's way different. It's way different. I mean, I should have a couple more jungle medicine experiences before I can really say, because I've only had the one, but man, it was very different than the Santo Daime experiences I had.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is there's many different styles of people who serve the medicine. There's different lineages, Shipibo, Huikuin, Yawanawa, Santo Daime. So there's these different lineages channeling down these different energies. And then there's different maestros and their own experience, their own connections to the spirits, whether it's the plants or angels or Christ with Santo Daime. So there's a lot of different variables to different experiences with the medicine. Yawanawa, when I sat with the Yawanawa, just commented, it's like 7 to 7, 12 hours, all the way throughout the night. And Shapibo, I've sat with 4.5 months yet in the jungle, it's usually, 3 to 5 hours, maybe 3 to 6, and then Santo Daime has different styles where we do 2 hour concentrations, just drink 1 cup, 2 hours silence, and with a little bit of singing. And then we have like 4 6 hour works, and then they have 12-hour works depending on the month and what's going on. So a lot of different styles, a lot of different lineages, and a lot of different facilitators, maestro, and shamans that all aid into different ayahuasca experiences.
Do you have the one that you lean towards in terms of what you resonate with?
Yeah, so for instance, I sat most with the Shipibo, and I feel super connected with the Shipibo. Like their Icaros and the medicine, it just felt like it was the channel for me. And then when I did Santo Daime, it was very uncomfortable in the beginning. And a lot of people are uncomfortable with Santo Daime in the beginning because the lights are on. That's like, I've never been part of an ayahuasca ceremony where the lights are on. So that's already drastically different. Two is we have to sit down. Never been part of a ceremony. We have to sit in a chair. Three, you're not allowed to cross your arms and you're not able to cross your legs. So this whole type of rigidity and conformity to this specific style was very uncomfortable. I'm like, I can't cross my leg. I can't sit on the floor. I can't, the lights are on. It's a little hard. And so it was a little bit hard from the beginning, but the reason I gravitated towards it is because I think it's more of my culture and my lineage from this life, being a Westerner. So working a lot with the Shipibo, they don't know what I've been through in my life. They don't know what I've going through, and they don't know what I'm going to go through because they're very detached from our Western culture. So it's like they have a completely different lifestyle, completely different culture, completely different paradigm and mentality and perspective that they live in. Do they know how to serve medicine in the way that works for them and their tribe? Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think there's a lot of missing things from them not being connected to our culture. And then also too, it's like I'm drawn to wanting to have a spiritual path to follow and to go down. And it's like you can't do that with Shipibo unless you live there like constantly and like start speaking Shipibo and start eating with the Shipibo and living with the Shipibo. And so it's not something you can really take home and follow as a path. And with
Hmm.
Santo Daime, I feel like I can do that because it's Christian oriented, it's Christ oriented. So it's more relevant in alignment with my heritage, my lineage, my culture from this life. And so it's easier for me to digest and understand. And actually, a lot of the things that I receive in the works, they don't call them ceremonies, they call them works, is all about the kingdom in heaven and Christ and all the angels and spirits that are involved and related to that Christic mysteries. So for me, I like it now because it's like it feels like it's a path I could actually follow and go down that's related to things that's more easily able for me to understand and to work through.
Um, I don't remember some of the more rigid things. Definitely I remember the room being split between the men and the women. You know, all the men had to be on one side, but I don't remember that them ever saying you can't cross your legs. And we were sitting on the floor, but probably it's a thing where there wasn't room for chairs and that kind of thing. You know, the room didn't have enough space.
I think my facilitators are more old school, and then it might have been different because maybe the people you're sitting with were traveling, so they're not in their church, they're not in their normal place.
Yeah,
Uh, and maybe they also just have a different style, but maybe my church is definitely more like traditional, like the way that it was founded in a sense.
that's so. Santo Daime was the first experience you had with ayahuasca, right? In Arizona, was it, or did you have a traditional one and then the Santo Daime?
So this is the biggest difference that I've continually experienced through, I think I'm, towards 70 plus ceremonies, is my first ayahuasca ceremonies were with Santo Daime medicine, but not from a Santo Daime practitioner.
Okay,
So he held the ceremony in this completely unique way that was, that fit him, but he bought medicine from who we both know, which is a Santo Daime church.
gotcha.
And I will say this over and over again, and I've had some good medicines. I've had some good medicines, but overall, in general, the best experiences that I've had consistently are always on Santo Daime medicine, whether it's from a Santo Daime practitioner or style, but the medicine, I always have some of the most, revelatory experiences, insights, visions, communication. So it's the medicine that is really special with Daime. And I don't know the exact process of how they create it, but I believe somehow, and I could be wrong, but I want to lean towards they do something to imbue the spirit of Christ into the medicine in itself. And for them, within my church, I feel like a lot of the emphasis is on the medicine that they create and they make and imbuing that spirit of Christ. And it's like they really believe strongly in the medicine they create. And I always seem to have my best experiences on Santo Daime medicine.
Is there I think from, if I remember correctly, from the original vision that the guy had that created Santo Daime, that it was a Mother Mary kind of energy, that the vision came to him and was just like, you got to make this new blend, and it was Mary. Is that right?
I think I don't know because I'm somebody who really follows my intuition, and I don't even like ask questions on anything I'm actually doing. I just do what it feels right. But I think you're leaning in the right direction from the little that I've read, which it was either the Queen of the Forest or a Mother Mary, but I definitely know where you're leaning in the right direction of like a feminine aspect coming through, and whether it's like the Queen of the Forest like ayahuasca, or it's the Sophia, the divine feminine coming through to channel and bring this through. But I definitely remember it also being referenced towards like a feminine motherly energy, the divine mother.
Right on. Yeah, I bring that up because so I had the kind of the individual ceremony with you as my first experience, and then another one-on-one experience, and then I had this group experience with Santo Daime. And in that experience, it was extremely feminine energy, that these, for lack of a better word, visions that came to me. And it could have just been part of the setting, because I was sitting down on the ground, and across from me on the wall of the building was a giant, like 4 or 5 foot by 5 foot image of Marilyn Monroe. The classic Marilyn Monroe picture with her on the grate with the air blowing up at her skirt, that whole thing. And so Maryland, like, I'm from Maryland originally, so maybe that's that's infusing my experience, or certainly it is infusing my experience. But there was this presence that I feel with ayahuasca in general, even when I'm not drinking the medicine, when I'm there to volunteer. That's a distinctly feminine energy, but that's what a lot of people describe. I've also had some people describe that they don't get that. They don't get a feminine energy. They don't even necessarily get a masculine energy. They just don't feel that it's specifically feminine for them. But it seems overall, a lot of people describe it as a feminine energy.
Well, you know what's interesting is I heard somebody say this, that in order to meet God, you have to be a woman. And the reason they were saying that was in order to meet God, you have to be surrendered.
Hmm.
You know, you can't like force your way to God and like grab God and take, you know. It's like in order to receive God, you have to be in a place of surrender, which is like the feminine aspect. And that's what you have to be on the medicine. I've never heard anybody say, I control the medicine, I control the experience, I control everything. No, it's like usually any type of you trying to force or control or manipulate or resist only gains you a lot more uncomfortability and a harder time. So just think about that aspect of like having to surrender in that space that already kind of puts you in a more feminine experience, more feminine place that maybe allows a more feminine experience to happen.
Hmm.
Versus of like, hey, we're gonna go chop some wood today. We're gonna go lift something heavy. We're gonna go kill something and stab it. It's like feels like really like masculine taking and like a dominating, you know? And my experience with Santo Daime is a much more fatherly energy. It's I think it's actually a really good mix. But when I do Santo Daime, when we have our works, it feels like I'm channeling a much higher energy. And I don't even necessarily mean higher isn't better. It just seems like a much more heavenly, upward oriented, father oriented energies that's being channeled through versus let's say the Shipibo, when we're in the jungle, we're on the earth, we got these trees and these vines and it's going loud and we're connecting to the plants and we're connecting to the animals and we're connecting to the mud, and it's like a much more feminine, earthly, animalistic, nature oriented experience. Where Daime, where we have the lights on, we're in a house. It's not a maloka. It's like a, you know, more of a traditional house. And it's much more these higher energies where we're singing songs to Christ, to Joseph, to Mary, to God. And so I noticed a lot more fatherly instruction and guidance in my Daime ceremonies that I've never really received through other styles.
Hmm. Interesting. And the church that you're working with, that's down there in Peru.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And so, how, when I had the ceremony up here with the group, it was extremely high energy music almost the entire time. Very little time was spent either in silence or in more chill, kind of just backgroundy kind of music. It felt very much punching me in the face, kind of like intentionally being overly happy kind of thing, which I guess I understand, especially for someone who's in a challenging part of their experience, that uplifting music can really help them move through that, right? But I'm curious how similar that is to the church you're sitting with down there.
Yeah, and I'm new to all this Santo Daime style, and I think at the end of the year they got a list of scheduled works to do throughout the year. I think that's what happened. It's like
Hmm.
at the in January, they're like, here's the schedule, and maybe all the people that practice Daime get that same schedule. It's possible. And they have lots of different works, lots of different works. So that's something to know where, for instance, our church every 15th and 30th, pretty much, they do 2 hour concentrations. And they're slightly different, but we'll have the medicine, and then we might just go into 2 hours of silence, hour and a half, hour 15, and then sing for 15, 30 minutes at the end and be done.
Hmm.
I actually really enjoy those. Just drinking the medicine, and then just sitting for an hour and a half in complete silence. It's really nice. You can really channel, be with your thoughts, really contemplate, see things from different perspectives. And I really like that. So that's a common staple that they have in this church that I'm with. They have works during, like we did one during Halloween for the people that were dead and saying prayers for them and writing names down of deceased family members. And there's works where we dance for 12 hours. I was part of that for my first time. So you do dancing for like from like 7 to 7, no chairs. You have to dance the whole time. So there's many different styles of works, and they have many different hymn books, like lots of different hymns, lots of different books of different hymns from different people. And so, yeah, it's just very different. Lots of different styles, but yeah, like the majority of this of the works have this really high energy music, which I really love. They're jamming on the guitar, jamming on the djembe. We got the maracas. Maracas is like another staple in Santo Daime. They have their own special patterns and rhythms that they do. They have like these special orders. You know, it's very orderly practice. And yeah, like that high energy can be really hard if you're dealing with some dark energy. I feel like if you're really dealing with some like dark energy, demons, trauma, it's almost like this high energy is just like attacking it. And you're like, fuck, can you guys just shut up for a fucking moment? You know, like it's too much, you know? It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
damn it, you know? And then this is really cool. And this is apparently really new. And they do these works called illumination works. And these are for people who might be harboring suffering spirits, um, demons or devils inside of maybe their astral body, or somehow part of their organism that is making it more a negative experience for them. And they're called illumination works. And so most ceremonies or most works, like you're saying, there's an order. You got to sit down, kind of have to focus, focus on your singing, focus on the force. And then these illumination works, you can do anything. So I was a part of one of these. You can roll on the ground, you can laugh, you can cry, you can scream, you can be in any position you want. So it's basically the exact opposite of what you normally have to do. It's like no holds bar. Whatever needs to be channeled through you in whatever way is totally cool and totally open. And I really enjoyed that one because I was like making all types of noises, all types of movements, and I really had the freedom to really express completely whatever the medicine wanted to move through me. And at that time, when they were jamming and they were going super hard, because they had this table in the middle, like the Star of David in the middle that they all stand around, they're jamming. It like really carried me through these really deep moments, hard moments, and like they're creating the channel and the current to keep moving and cleaning. And it was really beautiful to have that super high energy music while I was super deep in the medicine. And the facilitator here, she was serving me a lot of medicine. Like I felt like every 20 minutes she would come and like give me just a little bit more diming and a little bit more diming, just a tiny bit, but I was going super deep. So that real strong, forceful, amazing, beautiful music was like really carrying me. And so I really appreciated it then.
Um, yeah, for me it was perfect until I was starting to come out of it.
Hmm.
And then I felt resistance only because I just wanted some silence so that I could kind of contemplate a little bit. And I was having a hard time and just in that moment for a few moments there, just it was like it was banging on my head and I'm trying to think kind of thing, you know. But
Yeah, and I love silence too. I love silence. I love space,
yeah,
and it seems like every culture, in every avenue of life, all has its pros and cons. Like you're gonna get stuff with Daime that you can't get with Shipibo, and you can't get stuff. You can get the Ikados with Shipibo and the specific Ikados for you, but you can't get the 12-hour, journeys with Yawanawa and their guitar and their beautiful songs as well. So it's like each style has their strengths. And because they have a strength, that implies a weakness because they're focusing on one area more than another.
mm,
And so it's just something you have to, finding the lineage that you resonate with and then committing and then walking that path, I think is the best way to get the most out of it versus trying to do one and the other. And you in like my church, they don't care what I do. They're like, you can sit with the Shapibo, you can sit with whoever you want, whenever you want. And my church also too, we're not even supposed to invite people there. We like they told me many times, we don't invite anybody. Like, and they're not gonna tell me what I can and can't do. They're just saying, hey, like you can share your experience, and if people want to come, that's great. But this isn't like, hey, you need to come and be saved and drink the
Mhm.
medicine. So
Right.
they're like, don't even invite anybody. Like that's a big no-no for us. Like we're trying to be the exact opposite of the Christian church in the West that's trying to convert people and save people and bring people in. And that also too creates a really tight container because we're not trying to get people involved, and it's like you either have the calling or you're not. And if you don't like that style of not crossing your legs and your arms and having the lights on and singing in a certain way and shaking your maraca, you're gonna leave.
Yeah.
And so I like that too because it feels more family oriented. Like there's like a group that it's the same group every time. There isn't a lot of foreigners coming in just like wanting to try it out. Like you can get at a lot of the other temples around here. So it's like the same group of people with the same practice in the same way, and it creates more of like a closer community feel. Has been my experience.
Right on. Yeah, the group I work with down in Mexico, it's almost like there's no rules. There are some very broad kind of general guidelines that the curandero goes over with the group before to kind of start the ceremony, but it's very hands off. It's very just kind of as long as you're not harming anybody, or doing something dangerous, like there's no rules. And I really resonate with that. I don't know if that's just because I had such a strict life coming up, as a kid and everything. And there was a lot of structure in my life. And now I'm sort of exploring the other side of that, where I'm living a life that has, even though there is structure within it, I do my best to have it just be very go with the flow and unplanned and organic. So I love that about this group, that it's, I don't know if new age is the right way to, describe it, but and I mean, the curandero, that the main person that runs it was trained in the jungle in a much more traditional setting, but he's kind of, his mentality is just like, I'm not really trying to do it anybody else's way. I want to have it be, each person has it be their own way without it having, has to be this way or has to be that way, or it's also very unguided, I would say. He's letting the medicine, and he also has the mentality of giving people the least amount of medicine possible to have them be in the experience but still be lucid, versus having it just be like a knock you on your butt kind of experience, and you don't necessarily remember what happened because you were so deep in it. He wants people to just be getting their toes wet kind of thing. And then he comes around, like I think is pretty standard for all ceremonies, around an hour and a half in, and just says, "Are you in the experience?" And if the person says no, then you give them just a little bit more, just enough to get them in there. So, and I like that mentality too, especially for people that have never done it before. And in the setting, it's you're coming down for one day just to have the ceremony, and then you're immediately going back into your life. And so I think there's, and I haven't done it myself yet, but I feel like there's something to be said for making the effort to travel all the way down to the jungle, and you're there for a week or longer, and you're in it, you're having several ceremonies. There's probably a lot more integration opportunity after each ceremony. Whereas with this, it's just one day and you're back. So I think it's good for, especially for first timers, just to kind of have a real light experience that first time. Um, Knowing that they're just immediately going back into their life.
Yeah, I agree. I think ayahuasca can be very dangerous. And so, with that being said, I think gentle and soft and sweet, especially as you're beginning, is definitely the way I would want to do it, because you have to meet people where they're at. It's like, hey, maybe if there's five of us and we've all drank 100 plus times, then our capacity to handle more of the medicine and more of an experience and still conduct ourselves is far more. So we can go deeper, we can have more, but for average person, especially in a culture that's so materialistic, the Shipibo, like I asked my Shipibo family if they don't even really have a hard time with ayahuasca. Like my family members told me they were a little scared the first time, and then after that it was like just normal for them. It's just a different paradigm, different sensitivity, different culture. And yeah.
Aren't they exposed to it really early in life too? At least the ones that are going to be trained as maestros, they start having it at like 14 years old or something. I think I've read it's like twice or once a month, and then once they hit 16 or 18, it goes up to twice a month. Like it's very early in their life that they're being exposed to it.
It's possible. That's definitely a possibility. Um, but not usually. It just depends. It depends if you're a real maestro, yeah, like authentically. For instance, my fiance's mom and dad both were drinking at a very young age from that was delivered from their grandfather. So when you're born into a family, then that's doing that. But for obviously most Peruvians, not. But for the maestros and the good ones, yeah, that's usually the case.
Yeah. It's wild, man. The other thing I like about this group is there's no live music unless the people that are volunteering kind of chime in with the music that's playing through the speakers. So he's got a playlist of songs that are wonderful. And anyone who is there volunteering, or even someone who's participating, I suppose, but it doesn't really happen very often, that got a assortment of different instruments there to kind of play with a song versus they have to be the person making the music. This most recent ceremony that I experienced, usually there's a large group of volunteers because there's a large group of participants, and it's more often than not, it's primarily Spanish speaking. And I don't speak that much Spanish. I'm doing my best to learn. Well, I shouldn't say I'm doing my best to learn. I'm learning, but I could be doing better. But the there's many other people there that are far more experienced than I am with assisting. So up until this point, I've had a very hands-off approach, just sort of like getting my toes wet in the experience of assisting. And I always have the attitude of there's people here that are better at this than I am, and I want to just let them have the opportunity to do what they can do for someone versus me feeling like I should be the one doing that. But this most recent ceremony, it was catering towards English speakers, and it was one of the first times that we've done this. So we only had 6 participants, and we only had 4 of us there, including the curandero, to assist. And so where in the past I would step back, this time I was much more active with participating in whatever moment, in the ceremony that there was potentially a need, or even if it wasn't someone that looked like they had a need, just feeling guided to pick up a drum, kind of walk around the group, just lightly playing like an offbeat to whatever song's playing. And then the other 2 people besides the curandero are also, they have some experience, but they're also what I would describe as novice assistants, the way that I feel about myself. So that they're doing the same thing, where they're kind of just shaking a rattle, maybe playing a crystal sound bowl. But as the night went on, it was like we got more comfortable with it because we're the only ones there. It doesn't have to be done. We could just sit there and not do anything, but that doesn't really feel like why we're there, So it was just this amazing experience to not only feel guided, but then, and it's not like we're sitting down before something happens, you know, okay, well, hey, that guy over there looks like he's going through something. I'll pick up the bowl, you pick up the rattle, you pick up the tuning fork, and we're all going to do this thing around him. None of that was discussed. It was just organic, you know. It's like I just grabbed the bowl and I'm sitting there and I'm just kind of playing the bowl around his head, and then one of the others grabs a rattle and comes over and just starts shaking the rattle around his head. It's hard to put into words, but there was this, felt like either the medicine or spirit or whatever was moving through us, guiding our actions, to where as it's happening, we're kind of looking at each other like, oh, this is this is amazing. This feels amazing. And then afterwards, like the song ends, or you notice the person's energy shift, not like energy field, but just their kind of, you know, their facial expressions, they're restless, and all of a sudden they're just like, ah, like, okay, that person's good. Move on to someone else in the circle, or song ended and a new song started, and you just feel it's time to put the instrument down and go stand by the fire or something, you know. It's very intuition based. I'm not thinking, I'm not planning, I'm going to do this next and I'm going to go do that, you know. But then we're over by the fire and we're all just tripping out like, it just felt so good to participate like that, where none of us are planning it, and as we're doing it, it's just like, it's almost as if we're like jazz musicians or something who are just playing off one another. And yeah, I mean, it's like there's a healing taking place on, for me, through the experience without having had any medicine. So again, down in the jungle in a Moloko with, you know, a rattle, a leaf rattle going, and the maestro is singing an Ikaro. It's like that's happening there too, but it's more structured, I guess. Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's very organic for them as well. But just the ability to do these things and not feel like, oh, I have to do it a certain way, or I can't, I can't follow my intuition because there's very strict rules about how this should be done or whatever. You know, I really appreciate that about this group.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think all styles are entering some sort of trance-like state of consciousness. I'm like a non-ordinary state of consciousness, you know. And I think that's what the best facilitators and maestros have, is they have these connections to these plants, Chirksanango, Bobansana, Wambisa, Wakaprana, maybe to different animals, to different angels, to Christ. And then they're able to communicate, connect, and sometimes, you know, even channel songs, channel messages, channel body work or different instruments. And so I think everyone, 100%. I mean, in the good ceremonies I've been in, it definitely feels like, even with the daime, right? It feels like, it doesn't even feel like we're playing the maracas. It doesn't even feel like we're playing the djembe. It doesn't even feel like we're playing the guitar. It feels like the guitar's playing us, and the maracas playing us, and the drums playing us, and we're just become these instruments and these antennas and these channels for these other forces to work through, versus having to like put a lot of conscious effort, energy, and intention into it. And we're just allowing ourselves to be available to different spirits to work through us from other dimensions.
I can see how on the outside looking in, that could seem something like possession. I can see how that would scare some people uh, with no understanding of, you know, the sort of benevolent aspect of it. But I would argue that it's the same thing with someone who has zero experience with ceremony and is just playing a guitar, and they get into that same trance state, like, or maybe it's not a trance per se, it's just it's like in the zone, you know. You learn how to play a song on a guitar, and then you start it, or like just like how people learn how to type on a keyboard. At first it's just like, you know, and it's really hard, but then at some point, if you do enough of it, you know, just stop thinking about the keys that you're pressing, and all of a sudden you're just typing, and the words are coming out, maybe you make a typo or whatever, but you're not having to think about where your fingers have to go for which key. uh, Same thing on a guitar. I'll learn how to play a song and it'll be really hard at first, and then I'll get comfortable with it, and then it's like that part of my ability to focus in the moment gets moved from the conscious mind into the subconscious mind, and now I can actually think about singing the words that go with the song without having to think about playing the song. So it's like in order for that to be in order for that to transpire, I have to kind of be in this flow state where I'm not playing the guitar. The guitar, like you described, the guitar is playing through me without me thinking about it.
I think one, that's how I attempt to live my life, to be in that state all the time. And I think my guess is that we're always in that state all the time. I just think due to traumas that then some people hinder the flow. They resist, right? When we're afraid of something, or not conscious or present enough to where we're being influenced to go. Maybe we're heading down a street, and our energy is like saying, hey, like maybe don't go there, but we're not super conscious and present to navigate those feelings. But I think like ceremony is like a microcosm of life. And I try to live my whole life that way, of always being in that flow of presence and allowing myself to be guided to wherever it is to go, that's far beyond the mind and far beyond even logic and reason. Like I was guided to go to Peru. No idea if I was going to get help. No idea where I was going to go. No idea what I was going to do. Had no intentions of living here before I came here. No intentions of having a fiance. No intentions of getting a house. No intentions of having 2 dogs. No intention, only to be present and allow myself to follow the current that's guiding me, just like in ceremony. I don't know maybe what song will be sung. I don't maybe know how that like in what tone that I'll sing that song. Or maybe there just needs to be stillness. Or maybe we need to keep the energy moving. Or someone might be screaming and that's okay. Or maybe someone's laughing and that's okay. Or crying and that's okay. Or maybe they're not having an experience at all and that's okay. Maybe this person, and it's like learning to be present and have the capacity to contain the whole spectrum of life and the whole spectrum of ceremony, and then be present enough to know how to navigate the best way through it, through that divine intelligence.
Mm. Yeah, I like what you said there. That's something that I've doing my best to integrate too, is to bring the concept of ceremony into my everyday life, to where as much as possible, if not everything I do eventually will be somehow ceremonial, or at least have some sort of intention that's uh, bringing the awareness of the divine into the experience, which to me is what ceremonies like. That's really what ceremony is communing with the divine in some way, so that I'm not just moving through my life in my ego, but I'm aware of something bigger going on that I'm participating in.
Well, I think it's like my contemplation is, it's like taking this to the higher spiritual intelligence or principles or essence, and then integrating that into the ego, so that your identity isn't in maybe the lower chakras, right? Of like, I need to fuck, I need to eat, I need to survive, like this animalistic fucking, like eye for an eye, right? If some guy cuts me off, okay, I don't need to react if I don't want to, you know? And so it's taking these higher principles and higher wisdom and bringing it into the flesh, bringing it into the ego. And I've been reading a book by Rudolf Steiner that mentions that like what Christ came to bring to the world is the ego. And I feel like he was saying something like, before, in other epochs of time, from like Atlantis and Lemuria and like Egyptian time, they didn't have an ego that, or like nearly as strong as we have now. And their egos was very much like group soul oriented, and they were like, I and Father Abraham are one, and they really connected to the bloodline and the blood lineage that they were connected to. So they didn't feel like this separate self outside of this kinship and this patriarchy that they came from.
Hmm.
And so they actually identified more with their blood and the flesh than they did with spirit.
Hmm.
And I think he was saying Christ came to say, I and the Father are one. Meaning, I don't. There's some certain scriptures where he references like, leave your family, leave your husband, leave your wife, leave your child. Like you can't be with them and be with me. And I think the interpretation isn't like you need to leave your family. He's just saying that if that's your only reference to identity, then you're missing the picture, because
Hmm.
we all come from the Father, from the God, from the source, from divine. And so he's saying, hey, cool, I'm connected to you, but my true relationship within myself is this one, this vertical one. And so it's an interesting concept. He actually even says that even in the past, Atlantis and these other periods, that the spiritual and the physical were much more webbed together. They didn't have this, there wasn't this dichotomy. And he was saying, as the earth hardened and as our bodies hardened, because he said our bodies didn't used to be as physical. They used to be much more water, much more air,
Hmm.
and they could we could walk between the worlds much easier. And that's why people knew of gods and knew of other spirits that were doing things. And he was saying too, I think, that Christ came at a specific time. There was preparation for Christ, and then Christ came, and he came before we were right before we were heading into the most materialistic and physical epoch of human evolution. Because he was saying, if Christ came, if he didn't come before and we just head into that materialistic physical realm, we would have completely got lost in the physical and just gave ourselves over completely to the flesh and to this reality. And then it's like this pendulum swing, probably like we're going super deep into material and physical, like this separated ego consciousness that it just feels like it's just us and only us. And then we're going to be moving back, probably integrating this separation, but back to the Godhead again, back to God, to the Father, to the ultimate, to the supreme, to be connecting to everything. So it's like merging that ego, and that's like the most isolated version, physical part of ourselves, but then integrating that with like being connected to everything and being divine. I think that might have been, it's just a contemplation, right? Like I'm not saying this is the truth, but maybe that's what Christ came to represent. I am flesh, I am physical, but I also represent being divine, being connected to the logos and to the light and whatever, So these are interesting mysteries.
Yeah, I appreciate that description because I'm familiar with Steiner. Like I know the name, but I've never read any of his work. But it sounds to me like he's describing the great year, the Yuga cycle from the Hindu perspective. But Plato called it the great year, right? This 24,000 year cycle that the precession of the equinoxes tracks. And that's the whole thing of us moving into the age of Aquarius right now. But 12,000 years ago, during the last golden age, we were at like 100% consciousness in terms of our awareness of spirit and our spiritual nature. And then we've been falling, or we were falling in consciousness at some point from 12,000 years ago, maybe let's say 10 or 9,000 years ago, we moved in from the golden age into the silver age. And then we continued to fall in our consciousness of the divine and became much more material, just exactly the way you just described, basically. And so we go from the silver age into the bronze age and then into the iron age, which is the lowest point, the least aware. So it's like 100%, 75% in the silver age, 50% in the bronze age, and 25% in the iron age. And then 500 years ago was the bottom of the lowest point in the phase or the cycle. I think of it as a sine wave. At the top of the crest of the wave, we're at 100% consciousness, and the trough, we're at 25% consciousness. And we started to climb back up. 500 years ago was the bottom, and now for the last 500 years, we've been rising back up, and now we're at that cusp point between 25 and 50%. We're going back into the bronze age, and that's maybe what the age of Aquarius represents. But if you go back through history, written history, it's like the further back you go, the more they describe spirit as just everything everywhere. And then as we fell, it became anthropomorphized, and now we have like a council of divine beings, like the Greeks saw, all the gods living on Mount Olympus. And then, like you described, we're falling further and further. And at some point, we're getting so material that we're not even aware of God anymore. And that's what that point where Jesus showed up to just be like, just remember there's one God. Just remember there's God, not just one God, but it's too hard material. Like our minds are too material to be able to conceptualize God is everything or God is a group of gods. It's just like, just remember there's God while you go through this really dark period so that when you get out to the other side, you'll be able to unpack it again as your conscious, us, Christ talking to us or whatever. That's the message there. Just hold on to that. There's a God, because it's going to be rough this next few thousand years, like as we go through that darkest period. So that's really interesting to me as a parallel.
Dude, this book, this is the first thing I've ever read of Rudolf Steiner, and it's called The Gospel of St. John, and he's talking about his interpretation on the Gospel of St. John.
Mm.
How many people haven't not interpreted correctly. And I'm just like, this is the first book I've ever read from Steiner, so I can't pretend to even know anything about the guy or anything, but he talks about like these six spirits, I think, 6 or 7 spirits that lived in the sun, and they were called the Elohim.
Mm.
And they would transfer like information or light or intelligence, some sort of divine intelligence to the earth through the sun. These were the
Mm.
beings that lived in the sun and were responsible for this. And I guess Christ was a part of one of those spirits of the 7 Elohim. And he like separated himself from the sun and then through Jesus's baptism, maybe when he was 30 by John the Baptist, the spirit of Christ from the sun started integrating into the flesh, into Christ, into Jesus. And then which Christ, the spirit of the sun, one of the spirits of the sun, represented the light, the life, and the logos, and then became flesh. And then when he was crucified, that energy of the divine, of the Godhead, you could say, of the sun, actually integrated into the earth and changed the energy and the aura of the earth. And basically, like the most alchemical, shamanic, process. So like this type of esoteric Christianity is some wild shit. I'm like, if you think the story of Jesus is crazy to begin with, and now apparently, according to Steiner, I'm not saying I believe it, but it sure is fascinating that he really was the actual spirit of the actual sun, and then was able to come down into the flesh, and then through the integration of the blood, and then the blood being spilled, it was like this way of like some crazy shamanic alchemical transformation that's going to change the course of history and the earth forever. And actually, Steiner said, one of the cool things I like that Steiner said, he's actually said that the earth is the body of Christ.
Mm.
That's what he really meant when he said, like, eat, this is my blood, or something. But he actually was saying through him being crucified and his blood being spilled, and that energy of the sun coming into the earth became transformed and became the body of Christ itself. And some just like really fascinating ideas. It seems like Steiner is a clairvoyant seer that can look back into time and see the whole evolution. And he tells you about the Atlantis age and what that was and what people operated like. And then he'll tell you about the Lemurian age, and he'll tell you about the Egyptian age, and he'll tell you about the Roman Greek age. And he tells you how it was prepared and the different epochs we're going through, and then what it'll be in the future. So it's really fascinating because he, once again, like most scriptures, you just would never be able to, you would never be able to read him the way that he reads them. He's like, I'm initiated. And of course, he doesn't have that tone. He actually has like a very humble, precise, scientific tone. He's not like, I'm the initiated one. He's just saying, hey, when you're initiated, this is what this means.
Mm.
When he says, he was in sleep, or when he said they got married on the 3rd day in the canines, like the 3rd day means this, right? So he's just saying to the initiated, these things mean different things than whatever. But so yeah, real deep mysteries. I think we can all I think the majority of us, the way Christ has been represented, I don't think is the true Christ.
that we've seen in this specific time. And we're like literally in the most materialistic time. So people's paradigms and the way we think now and the way we orient ourselves, when you read stuff, it's people are so far off the mark compared to what actually had happened, and then actually how this was communicated and written down thousands of years ago. From reading this book, the way I think about it is like you wouldn't even be able to understand the consciousness that was held these 12,000 years ago. Like it's a complete way of thinking, like of operating. Like you wouldn't even be able to comprehend the different paradigms we lived in. And like you're saying, they lived completely with spirit. It wasn't like, and if anything, he says at some point, like especially the Indian culture, he said some great sages came down from Atlantis, and then like through the flood created like these different Indian cultures and maybe the rishis and some of these really high level beings, and they didn't want anything to do with form. They're like, this is an illusion, this is Maya. I want to be connected to the Brahman, to the Godhead, and they created systems like yoga and meditation to then always be connected and to move out of the physical. So they weren't like, hey, the physical is great, this is where we should be. They're like, this isn't the true reality.
Hmm.
And so anyways, yeah, really, really interesting things.
Yeah, that's I love exploring these topics. It's my jam. Asking the maybe not the forbidden questions per se, but they end up coming into the mix because it's just I want to understand what isn't understandable probably, but it instead of just being like, well, I'll never understand it, so I'm not going to look into it. It's like that it causes, if it's something I don't understand, it causes me to want to lean further into it to try to understand it.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to know the truth. Like, if there is a truth out there, I'd like to know like the truth of what really is and what really happened and where we really are and where we're really going. And like even for Christ, since I've been kind of moving down that road, really, I would really like to know who Christ really was and who Jesus really was and what really happened. Um, and so I just try to be humble, and I'm just open to learning, without trying to put my own agendas or preconceptions or my own preferences in there. I'm like, fuck, dude, Jesus is spirit of son is in the blood, and that was that. Now it's changed, just like wild stuff. But I think the more wild it becomes, the more like realistic it seems in some weird way.
I agree. I was raised Christian too, and the less I think about Jesus Christ as an actual dude walking around and think of the concept of the Christos, the spirit, as a metaphor, especially for astrological perspectives, like the sun, the actual sun in the sky is the son of God, the same kind of thing, like Jesus being the son of God, as a physical being, a male son versus a sun in the sky, and Jesus is the center of the group of 12 apostles, the same way that the sun is the center of the story of the 12 zodiac signs. And it's just from my little bit of research that I've done, it seems pretty straightforward that the pagan ideas, they probably didn't even call it a religion back then. It was this their way of celebrating. It was very heavily influenced by that metaphor. And so the Romans came along, and all they wanted was to control everybody. They wanted everybody to be under one empire, and they saw all these ancient rituals, and it was like, how do we get these people to follow us when they've got this other system that they don't need us? And so they anthropomorphized Jesus and made him a man. And whether the story of the crucifixion actually happened or if it's a metaphor for the sun's journey through the zodiac, whatever the truth is, like you said, I just want to know the truth. And I don't know that I'll ever find the actual truth, but what I know I can find is, at least from my experience, is what's not true, and remove that layer so that the truth can potentially be revealed more versus having some other layer on top of it. And so, and I don't know where this came from. I think I watched a documentary where this idea was proposed, but I really resonated with it. And that's the guy that we think of as Jesus Christ, the living man, was the son of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra, which was the guy named Caesarion. And he, being the son of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra, he was the heir to both the Western Empire and the Eastern Empire. He had the potential to unify Rome and Egypt just by being who he was. And Julius Caesar could never have any sons. Like, he had all these women give birth, be his concubines or whatever they call it, and he had all these female offspring, but he never had a son. And then he met Cleopatra and had a son. And so I think he was grooming Caesarion to take over. And the Roman Senate were just like, hell no, and that's why he was murdered. But the story in the written history is that Caesarion was murdered shortly after Julius Caesar was murdered. But I think of the story of Jesus and how he was spirited away from the Holy Land when he was like 12 or 13, and disappeared for 18 years. And then he came back to start his ministry. And he apparently traveled to India. When I was visiting Japan back in 2012, there's stories of Jesus being in Japan. There's even stories of Jesus being in Native America, like the Native Americans had supposedly met him. But he traveled around the world, and certainly in India learned maybe Buddhism or the Hindu ideas, and kind of became a master. And actually in Japan, he was supposedly lived there for 5 years and was trained in ninjutsu, became a master of their sacred arts, and then comes back to the Holy Land to free his people from the Romans, and led a peaceful uprising potentially, or maybe it wasn't peaceful, I don't know. But either way, they took him out, or they tried to take him out, and he escaped. That's another version of the story from Japan, that he wasn't actually crucified, that his brother, which is after Julius Caesar was murdered, there was Mark Antony, who was Julius Caesar's like second right-hand man. And he then married Cleopatra and had some offspring. So Caesarion had half brother and half sister. So that guy apparently was crucified, and Caesarion got away and actually went back to Japan and lived there until he died, like 120 years old or something. But anyway, this uprising, this popular revolt that he tried to lead, because he's the rightful heir of both kingdoms. And so all these people, and he's preaching the truth, the way, which is the Buddhist, the middle road, all these teachings that all of us resonate, I think, when we listen to Jesus's actual words. They're so similar to Buddha, and it's like this unifying message of follow the Father and follow your heart, and all these things, that I think everybody identifies with, or a lot of people identify with, that are things that don't make them want to challenge someone like Jesus. Just that's why he's maintained his position all these years as such a positive influence in the world. But they had to squash that, and the Romans, in order to keep control of the Holy Land. So they took him out, or they didn't, but he's gone. And then all the people that were there on his, following his movement, represent the Jews that in year 70 AD or something, the Romans came and just razed the entire city of Jerusalem and murdered all these people. And then 100 years later, there was a second uprising of the Jews that the Romans called the Jewish Wars, the two wars. It's like these people wouldn't be squashed because they had been party to or descendants of this uprising that took place that would have changed the world back then in a positive way. And that's where the Romans, a couple hundred years later, finally got together and wrote the New Testament as a way to manifest this story of a pacifistic character that they called Jesus, to try to almost like a mind control situation, where they're trying to get the people that are still resisting their control to follow this religion, to pacify them so that they can be absorbed into the Roman Empire and stop uprising, And whitewashed what actually happened and overlaid it with the story of this guy Jesus, who may or may not have actually existed as an individual, according to the story we know. It could have been a different person that had a different agenda that the Romans didn't want us to remember going forward in time, because it would have caused this continual like resistance to their rule kind of thing. I don't know, it's just this interesting. I, I don't know. Obviously, I'll probably never know what happened back then. Maybe it's written down somewhere legit that's being hidden in the Vatican Library or whatever. Who knows? But I like that idea that there is an actual dude that was trying to unify the world the way that we all think of Jesus, but it wasn't necessarily the story of this actual guy. I mean, the word Jesus in Greek means fish, and Christ is Christos. It's a title. It means Messiah. And so to me, Jesus, since he showed up as we entered the age of Pisces, Jesus the fish is like the avatar of the Piscean age, the leader of the Piscean age for the light is what he most resonates with me as an energy. So he's like, the anointed one, the anointed fish, the anointed person that represents the Piscean age. And now we're shifting out of that age. So it's like he's served his purpose to get us through this darkest time. Anyway.
Yeah, I think according to this book, since I'm fresh off reading it, it's like what Christ's impact on the world and humanity, it's not something we can know yet. It's just it hasn't made its resolution, right? It's like and Rudolf Steiner saying these things take thousands of years, right? So he's like, when the Christ really comes, when the impulse that he came to bring to the world is actually manifested, will be thousands of years from now. Like it's not anytime soon. So the preparation for these things, I mean, like we're talking about, like imagine having this consciousness like they did in the past of like spirit and the spiritual realm and this realm are one. Like they could see into in that realm and know these things. And it's like we have no idea where we're going. 5,000 7th, it's going to be the most incredible journey, and I think we'll get there through reincarnation, and for those who are willing to evolve and flow with the evolution of the stars. And I think they're reading this book, and I think this would be my guess as we're just brainstorming together. It's like I think the physical realm is really important to all these things manifesting from the spiritual. It's like as above, so below. And so all these physical representations are reflections of the spiritual. So it's like, okay, Jesus is a man. That's true. Like, let's just pretend he is flesh. He needed to be a man, but what's his reflection in the spiritual realm? The spirit of the sun. So it's like you're saying, these zodiacs, the solar logos, maybe these disciples are reflections of the other signs and other archetypes, but it's like they need the physical world to like, to move through and implant. There's just reflections. So there's just deep mysteries that I think right now we're like the farthest from really knowing, because we've gone so physical, so materialistic. But I think we're definitely working our way back now, and some really incredible things are going to happen. But yeah, it's wild, very wild.
It's definitely an exciting time to be alive. I feel like the internet giving us the ability to learn this stuff, because I wasn't finding any of this in the Encyclopedia Britannica growing up. It's not like I could go to the library and thumb through the card catalog and be like, oh, tell me, about astrotheology. It just wasn't available to us. So just having the access to the knowledge, however much of it is true versus false, just being able to contemplate in a different way versus just the written version that we had before the internet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm living in Peru because of the internet, hearing about ayahuasca for my first time a long time ago. And I mean, it was all sparked from the internet. So and I think we will all navigate our way through the knowledge to figure out what resonates with us the most. Like the Western church has never resonated with me. Like the person they depict Christ as, I've never been able to grasp, and here I am going to this Christian ayahuasca church down here in Peru and reading these esoteric Christianity books from Rudolf Steiner. It's like, once again, I'm not guiding this. I'm just being guided. But because maybe I do have that intention, or maybe it's because the grace of God or the universe, but to want to actually know what the truth of myself and my soul and my spirit are, and whatever else it may be. So yeah, just being patient with it all.
Patience is key. Well, especially in a situation like yours where you've got actual like physical pain that you're looking to hopefully find resolution with. I I've been in physical pain in my life. I've had situations with injuries, but not chronic pain. And so I can talk all day about patience and how important it is, but it's a lot different when you've got a hot searing poker sticking into you to just be like, okay, I'm just gonna sit with this.
Fuck, dude, it's the ultimate mystery of the life that I'm living, because I've had these ailments from a long time now, and I've never even come close to understanding where it's coming from or what's causing it. Not even like the slightest pinprick of like anything else I've ever tried affecting it in some way. And I'm in Peru, going to this Christian ayahuasca church, have a Shipibo fiance, 2 dogs, house, residency. Like, my whole life has really come together over here within 6 months. Far better than it's ever been in the States, just from like a living perspective, much more connected to the nature. The items and the tapestries and the culture around here is so much more resonant to who I am as a person and what I enjoy and what I like. And I came over here because of my chronic pain. Like, that's the reason I solely came. I would have never come if I wasn't in severe pain. So it's just this weird surrender and patience and wanting to understand and wanting to know, but not having it, and dealing with the pain. And so it's like a very, I can look and like look at my physical life and how much better it is, and how it all makes sense for me to come over here and experience this. That was a result of my chronic pain. But then the severity of the chronic pain, I'm like, I don't get it at this the level of the plainness of the chronic pain. So it's just a very, I just keep trusting, and I have a lot of faith, and keep moving and enduring. You know, it's a lot of enduring of a lot of pain. I was in a lot of pain the last few days, and it's like very incapacitating, and it's very taxing mentally, emotionally, and physically. It's a very severe, in my own opinion, of what I'm going through, very severe experience to endure. And there's like nothing else to do but to endure and trust some bigger picture. And that doesn't even really include healing, or include pain going away. That's not really my 100% initiative. Naturally, I think if anyone's in pain, they're going to want to be out of it. I think, like, just as a natural inclination. But if I never got out of it, it would be okay, because for me, I think life is temporary, right? Like, even if I had it till I was 100 years old, it's temporary. I can endure it. It's not fun. I don't enjoy it, and I don't like it. No matter how hard I try to be grateful and surrender and accept, which I do, just the severity of the pain is not, it's not something that's like I could really, you can't maybe enjoy enjoyable things, you know, to some certain end of the spectrum. Or maybe that's not, like, where else would it even be the point of it anyways, almost, in a sense, if the pain wasn't there to for some purpose. So yeah, I don't know. It's just definitely a big part of my journey and a big part of my life. It's interesting.
I don't know that it produces any relief to perceive it this way, but it seems to be true in my experiences, and just what I've talked with others about it, that it's true that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And so there's potentially a hardening taking place of your spirit, maybe, or your aura or whatever, that like will enable you to handle more than other people who are not experiencing this. And it's not necessarily for what you can handle right now, but rather what's coming in the future, as things potentially get way more intense in the external world as we move through this next 20 years or whatever, right? Like, things are going to get crazy probably. much crazier than they are now. And whatever that, you wouldn't know it until you're in your 70s or whatever, that whatever what you were going to experience was preparing you for, this pain, physical pain was preparing you for not just potentially physical toughness, but also emotional and mental and spiritual toughness that you, in order to persevere and potentially to be a container for others, that you had to have that hardening. It's kind of like the way that a clay pot is stuck in the fire to finish it, to make it hard, so that it can, otherwise it'll just fall apart, right?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think because I think if you're dealing with something severe, probably in any avenue, there's only two options. I feel it's very binary, which is one, it makes you more bitter, more resentful, more angry, more depressed, more negative, and it takes you down that path, or it makes you, for me, having more faith, more trust, like more perseverance, more courage. It's just an energy, right? It's an experience and it's an energy, and your attitude and your perspective is gonna like orient whether you're going down into a darker place of like, why me? And then I can't do this and I can't do that, and this sucks, and when am I ever gonna get out of this? And then, whatever that dark entanglement goes to, or I'm grateful that I have what I do have. I'm grateful for the experiences that I do have. I'm grateful for what I have gained from this, and all the positives you can gain from it. And so, yeah, I agree 100%. And it's hard because when you're in the moment, it's like, you don't know what you're really getting out of it, because you just can't see. It's like a lot of my life has been like the Mr. Miyagi training with the Karate Kid, where he tells the Karate Kid to go paint the fence, and then wash the car. And you're like, the fuck am I washing this fucking car for? Like, the fuck are you doing? Like, I don't want to wash no fucking car. And then it turns out that you've actually been doing like martial art moves, where he's like, paint the fence. He's like, then he like blocks or something, and or whatever. He's actually learning other principles towards another avenue, without knowing it, through washing the car and painting the fence. And that's like me. I'm like, sometimes I realize certain things that I'm gaining like that, and then I know other areas like I'm gaining things, but I don't know what they're going to turn into.
Yeah.
So it's just, but that makes it real. I actually heard somebody say this. They said they actually said Jesus channeled. They channeled this from Jesus, but who knows? They said that the times in your life when you say like this shouldn't be happening, like the really hard dark times, and like this doesn't seem right, is like the time that's like exactly how you planned it up in the spiritual realm. Like, this is exactly how it should be, So, and if you think about it, like, I just had this thought right now, like, if you are a spiritual being, like if your spirit is always in the spiritual realm, and this is like a temporary experience that really isn't permanent, right? It's like, I guess it's like the coolest shit ever to go down to earth, into this physical plane, and experience things that are going to disappear within a blink of an eye. You're like, I can go experience cancer, chronic pain, my son committing suicide, or my wife being killed by a drunk driver, and like actually experiencing these emotional states that can shift your consciousness, and you can experience more parts of yourself. It's like the ultimate, video game that doesn't really have any weight to it per se, but where a lot of learning and growth can be made in a safe way, in some ultimate eternal sense.
Dig that. What you said a few minutes ago, that I don't remember which gospel it's in, but that moment where Jesus says, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" Like, he's just before he dies on the cross. There's like this moment where he no longer feels the spirit of the Father. He's abandoned. He feels that he's been abandoned. It's like the first time he's ever felt alone, or at least since he started his ministry, maybe ever in his life, that he didn't feel that spirit of God. He's like, "Why have you forsaken me? Why have you? This is the moment I need you the most. I'm about to transition. Like, what? Why are you leaving now? Like, of all times, And that's that. It's necessary. It's necessary. Not necessarily fun, but in order for the whole story to unfold, that ultimate darkness has to be experienced.
Yeah, there's two. I've been listening to another guy named Prophet Lovey. He's like a Christian prophet, and I've been listening to some videos on him recently, and he talks about listening to the spirit versus the flesh. And I think I can kind of relate to that, where it's like I've learned not to live according to my flesh. My flesh wouldn't want to be doing many things and go many places and doesn't like the experience, but my spirit is like what I attempt to be obedient to, and not act out of how actually I'm feeling physically or emotionally or mentally. So it's like Christ, before he gets crucified, there's some scripture that's like, God, if this cup can pass before me, and he's basically saying, hey, if I don't have to get crucified, that's great, but let it be your will. He's like, hey, if we can make this not happen, that's great, but if it's your will, then let it be done. And that's how I aim to live my life, which is like this obedience to this higher calling, my higher self, my higher spirit, God, and being obedient to it. And I guess too, once you understand like this temporariness and this isn't permanent, right? Like you're not actually dying, right? It's going to be uncomfortable. I'm not going to like it, but there might be deeper things to gain from it. And maybe the deeper it is, the more there is to gain. And maybe the more aware, wise, and strong you become, the deeper the challenges are. And there you go.
Well, and like we were saying earlier, that the more you can endure, the more you can handle, the deeper you can go. And without that endurance, without that strength, you can't get to those places.
Yeah, and everyone's afraid of the dark. Everyone is afraid of the dark. And I was listening to another guy, and he's a big believer of going into the dark from his own life. And he goes, in Genesis, there's something about the darkness, verse 2 or something, right? And it's like there was darkness upon the face of the earth. And then in verse 3, he talks about the light that came in and entered. And he goes, all creation, all life comes from the darkness. He's like, y'all love to talk about the light in verse 3, but you don't mention how the darkness was there first.
Yeah.
And so, it's like these caverns of our own being that we've subconsciously, advert and divert away from is actually where all our power is. I heard somebody say that they're like, someone told me that your higher self is in your darkness, because that's all the untapped potential. It's all the untapped power. It's all of you not knowing yourself or being afraid of whatever it is, but it's in the unconscious places that we have to go do these soul retrievals on, personally and spiritually and culturally. And so yeah.
There's a Trevor Hall song called "The Fruitful Darkness." It's exemplifying what you just said, basically.
And then I guess, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it makes sense to me. You can only go into the dark to the degree that you have the light, right? Because you have like the ultimate trust, and the ultimate trust that everything's gonna be okay, and that the good's gonna come out of this in some way. The deeper you can go into the dark, but when you're afraid and you have a lot of fear and you don't have a lot of trust and you don't have a lot of faith and you don't really know who you are, then you don't even dabble in the shallow end of the dark. You're like, it's gonna overtake me. It's gonna hurt me. It's gonna kill me. It's gonna, so.
And I think invariably it then works through us in our blind spots and manifests in the world. And then we're just like, I don't understand why my life sucks so bad. Why this horrible shit keeps happening. Yeah. Good times. Good times in the dark. That's what I love about the float tank, man. And I think that's interesting about the float tank in particular. People who especially people who don't know anything about the float tank, and like a boyfriend or a girlfriend is bringing them as a surprise for their birthday kind of thing, and they've never even heard of a float tank, and they go back there and they open the tank door and they're just like, hell no, I'm not getting in there. And it, to me, it's a metaphor for their own unwillingness to explore their darkness. They're not, they're not ready to go in there yet. They don't have the strength. They haven't cultivated the strength and the awareness of the need for the opportunity to get in there and what you can, you know, glean from it. But
Yeah, no,
I like the idea of, there's a light inside of us. So when you step into the darkness, you are illuminating the darkness, and it might just be a candlelight around you. But the more you add kindling to your own flame with experience, the brighter your light can be, and the more illumination you can bring into the darkness. And therefore, it becomes less scary to step in there.
yeah, I mean, that's what a guide really is. A guide really is a light in of somebody who's gone there first. So, you're in ceremony and it's like, hey, I'm cool. Like whatever darkness comes up, I'm very comfortable with that. Not afraid of it, not scared of it. And like that's why healings can happen, is allowing the darkness to reveal itself. You have to become aware and has to have exposure. That's why these things and diseases manifest, because they stay hidden.
Mm.
Same thing in business. Hey, I've been there. I've made 800 YouTube golf videos. I've made multiple successful golf membership sites, and the clients that I've worked with, every single one of them's fucking scared to be on YouTube, scared to create a membership site. And it's interesting enough because those people that I've worked with have gotten phenomenal results because they feel the calling to do something bigger, but they're very terrified of what people are going to think and how good they're going to be and all these things. But when you let go, when you're ready to finally let go and go to that next level, there's always more expansion, um, more abundance, maybe more problems too. Um, so yeah, the light really is somebody who's gone there and done it before.
Microphone drop.
Yeah. You know,
I appreciate that, brother. That's a good place to end.